we're allowed outside. So onwards and upwards from here. But as Sandon said, just a bit of a brief background on myself. I've been employed by Tennis Australia for over 10 years now, and have performed a number of different roles for Tennis Australia. Prior to the current role, I was involved in the talent identification and performance space, which I suspect many on this call are familiar with, but certainly presenting here a step removed from the performance side and the various academies that are now part of the new structure. So there might be instances where I need to default to Sandon on what the practical implications for each of you are as they relate to performance, but I can potentially provide some insight on the UTR. So to begin with, I think I'll provide a bit of a background of the UTR so you know where it's come from, where it's headed. So the UTR has actually been around for quite a while now, less so in Australia, but particularly in the US. It is fundamentally a technology company, the UTR. They're based in Silicon Valley, and their value proposition is based on a rating, which is an algorithm they've derived, which is quite different to the ranking and rating systems you may otherwise be familiar with. So Tennis Australia partners with the UTR. We saw the rating and the algorithm as a nice addition to the market, and at a point in time where rankings were the dominant feature, and a ranking, whilst it drives certain behaviours, what it also does, it only rewards winning and losing fairly simplistically. It doesn't place a huge value on the strength of the opponent and what your score was. So we as Tennis Australia thought there was a really good opportunity to introduce the UTR into the Australian market to give players of all standards a better indication of their playing ability. So with that in mind, about 12 months ago, when we started bringing the UTR to the Australian market, we were particularly interested in positioning the UTR initially as a golf handicap, if you like, for tennis players, and of particular appeal to the more participation segment, where two players of a modest standard wanted to find someone of a very similar standard to themselves and organise a heat of tennis or a competitive match. So we think the real opportunity remains in using the rating as an opportunity to identify other players of a similar standard, so you can have this level-based experience. And what we know of level-based play is it does two things for our sport. Number one, it leads to a better or more wholesome competitive experience, if you like, and that is likely to retain players in our sport for longer. And the other opportunity with level-based play, which is of particular relevance to a number on this call, is that it does lead to better performance or developmental outcomes. The more competitive the matches are and the more often you play those, the more likely your game is to excel. So the notion of level-based play is something we're really exploring as a sport for both retention benefits, but particularly for performance benefits also. And the UTR facilitates that outcome better than any other ranking system that is available in the market right now. So really for us, or for me as Tennis Australia using the UTR, it is about creating the right type of competitive experiences where players of a similar standard can compete against each other as regularly as they see fit. Since the pandemic occurred, what, as you'd all be really aware, is that the traditional tournament scene and thus the traditional ranking systems needed to be paused for the very fact that a national tournament structure or a national ranking, when domestic borders are closed, it is just not necessarily appropriate, if you like, to keep that system active. And obviously through 2021, we'll look at some workarounds for that. But during the pandemic, when a lot of players were not in a position to travel beyond their state, and particularly for some on these calls, were not in a position to travel beyond their country, and that might be a number of years away, we needed to find a solution that provided players the opportunity where matches still counted. and the only really active rating system or ranking system in the market over that period of time was the UTR, because it doesn't necessitate people travelling to either improve their rating or finding someone of a similar standard. And you would have seen over recent months these UTR events, and that's really just the vehicle for us as Tennis Australia and Tennis South Australia to provide ongoing match opportunities, whilst the broader tennis industry is in a bit of a pause because of various travel restrictions and so forth. So the UTR, in summary, it's a technology company based around an algorithm that has been developed for a number of years. It is fast becoming an events opportunity also, and you would have seen the UTR events that have occurred, particularly at the pro level, where the UTR are funding in many respects the prize money associated with those. And so we're really excited with Tennis Australia around what the opportunity is, as I said, to facilitate this notion of level-based play, which has direct implications to player retention and player development. As it relates to yourselves, and I can only suspect the aspirations you do have with your tennis travelling through the pathway and beyond, the UTR is largely the universal language of college tennis, and that's really where it started. So you will, for those who are pursuing that college pathway, if you like, a lot of the recruiters and the coaches will ask of us as Tennis Australia or representatives of what a player's UTR is. They're not necessarily asking what their Australian ranking is. They're not asking what their ITF ranking or rating is, but they are asking what is a player's UTR. So it is clearly providing an avenue through to college tennis. We have seen it provide an avenue to selection criteria into different programs, as Sandon alluded to, and more specifically into events that have been run over the past 6 months, and arguably will continue into the future. In terms of the rating itself, I think it's really important to distinguish why or how is it different from the other rankings and ranking systems that you're probably more familiar with. It's influenced by 3 variables. One is the strength of your opponent. The second is the games won. And the third is it takes into account your 30 most recent matches. So prior to the pandemic, we did some analysis around various ranking systems and rating systems that were available in the market. The UTR did demonstrate its superiority in predicting the match outcome, if you like, and thus the actual real or relative standard of a player. So we have great strength in that the UTR is providing the best indicator of a player's standard based on all of the other ranking systems that are available. So yeah, what we really liked, as I said, I'm not in performance anymore, but we did like a couple of things around the UTR, and I guess the reasons why we started to use it as part of the selections and so forth was that the number of games won really matter, and that places some immediate pressure on players to make sure there's no lapses in concentration. If they are expected to beat someone decisively, the score should reflect that. It places more value on more points, and however we can create that environment for our players where every point in every game counts, we think is a good thing. And as I said, second to that, we've identified that, particularly based on recent form, it provides a really good indicator. So the idea of protecting a ranking, if you like, or chasing a ranking system, it's partly mitigated by the way the UTR is calculated. And yeah, we've got the greatest confidence in its accuracy. Particularly for Tennis Australia, and I suspect many questions around selections and so forth. Fundamentally, the UTR is not the panacea or the answer to every solution, but what it is another source of data. So I'll throw to Sandon on what the various criteria are, but you're clearly going to look at recency of performance. You're going to look at ranking systems. You're going to look at player behaviour. The UTR is another source of data that provides insight on a player's standards. So I don't think as a sport we'll get to a stage where there is only one ranking or rating system, but the UTR does provide some really good insight onto a player's recency of performance, and how well and how decisive they can win matches when they should be playing against opponents of different standards and so forth. But yeah, it's really come to life off the back of this pandemic, where we, as Tennis Australia and Tennis South Australia, needed to find a vehicle whereby matches still counted. They still led, particularly players on this call, to a place where they can be recruited for college tennis and so forth. So it's really found its place over the past 6 months, and we think, through 2021 there'll be only more upside as we integrate the UTR into the tennis industry even further. So, Sandon, I've seen a couple of questions come through. I've had to dial in on my phone, so I might get you to ask them out, and I'll provide some more information if I can. But I guess I'm not here today speaking on behalf of performance and what the NDS squads and NTA squads look like, but just in terms of the rating itself and how it is serving as a valuable additional data source to provide more information around a player's standard.
Yeah, thanks, Callum. I guess the first one, just for me, just touch on, I guess, around the privacy policy with some of the younger kids, because we do have some of the younger ones, especially on this call this morning. Like, is that right in saying that the under 15s, if you're under 15, that there's a privacy policy which prevents them from accessing their data?
Yeah, not quite. Particularly where the UTR is strongest is for those players who are playing competition tennis regularly. And for those who are playing tournament tennis regularly, for those that are in tournaments, as part of your agreement to play in various Tennis Australia sanctioned events, you do consent to the opportunity for us to send match data onto a third party, and that third party in this case is the UTR. Where we have particular challenges, obviously working with Australian data privacy law and the US, is when a player is simply involved in local competition that is outside of the sanctioned play, if you like. But a lot of tennis tournament players in particular, through the sanctioned tournament process, are agreeing for us to send match data onto the UTR. So it's far less of an issue for tournament players. Where it becomes slightly complicated, and we're looking at the scenario of how we create a workaround, is that player who is 12 and under and playing in a local club or team competition, but not really engaged in tournament play as such. As it stands, we send to the UTR, as part of our relationship, a lot of the data that is fed through Match Centre, which includes league play, but it's predominantly at this point tournament-related results that feed into the system.
Okay. I think that's probably going to answer one of the questions, but just the first one is from TJ. How long is UTR going to last, and when will the Australian ranking come back, if it does?
Yeah, good question. I think there's some communication that's going to come out in the coming days or weeks around what the Australian ranking system and the plans for that may look like through 2021. The UTR is here to stay, and particularly for players of your standard, which a number of whom who may have college tennis aspirations. As I said, it is the rating system they use to provide scholarships and so forth. So whilst the college tennis system in the US continues the UTR, it has a place for us domestically as the vehicle to allow more players to get access to scholarships and so forth. The question is really, how do we have a system where both coexist? I think the Australian ranking system is a good system in that it's pretty simple how your ranking goes up. You need to play high level events and you need to win. But we're also aware that there are more variables at play than just winning or losing. And that's why I think the UTR will be a supplementary or a complementary tool to allow administrators or various selectors greater insight into a player's relative standard. As I said, it'll show the frequency of how often someone is playing, when they're playing against someone that they should arguably beat really easy. Do they do that? And obviously the recency of performance, so the last 30 matches are taken into account. So, the hot streaks that a number of the junior players get on will be recognised in a way that wouldn't be potentially recognised by an Australian ranking system. So both will exist. Both serve a slightly different purpose. But what both do in a situation whereby they both exist is they provide more information by which administrators and selectors and so forth can use these tools to make more informed decisions.
Right. And you sort of touched on this one. This is from Jane. Why are my Friday night Premier League matches not getting counted as UTR matches?
Sure. So it relates somewhat to the scenario I just mentioned, where the place we've started with the UTR has particularly been tournament play, which obviously all the matches are on tennis.com.au. Those results are fed through to the UTR. We're now working through a system whereby competition play, which is not, in some cases, it's not sanctioned, or it's not using various pieces of software that allow the integration to easily happen. That's the piece of work that is now underway. We thought, where do we start with this? And the best place to start was tournaments, but we are working through a system whereby all matches, regardless of whether they're a school competition, a club competition, all feed through to inform the one rating system. So that's it's a piece of work in the pipeline, because we think there's a great opportunity where, similar to a golf handicap, everyone can identify with one rating system. Every time they play feeds into that rating. And we think that is the future, and we're in a bit of a hurry to get there, but that is to come. And there's a few things at the back end that make some of this slightly complicated, particularly when we look at integrating systems and all the variables associated with that. But it is coming, and a big project that's on our desk, now, is to figure out the best way that we can have every match count towards one rating and one player profile.
Mm-hmm. From Gia, how often does UTR get updated?
Well, one of the features of the UTR, it updates every 24 hours. So it's really operating in a live environment. We work on a system with the UTR whereby all of the match centre results that are as largely Tennis Australia's central repository of information, we send all of those matches across weekly. They then conversely send all of the updated UTRs for players back weekly also. But you will see one of the advantages of the UTR is that it can move daily. As I said, in the way the information flows back and forth from the UTR, we get comprehensive player lists each week. And I don't know what the exact, and Sandy, you might know how often the Australian ranking system or the ITF system ranking gets updated, but I do know that the UTR updates with greater frequency than the other systems, which is a real advantage.
More around weekly.
The volume of players.
Definitely ITF's weekly, and I think AR is as well.
Yep.
From Linnea Bryant, will the UTR go down in the pandemic?
Will it what, sorry?
Will the UTR go down in the pandemic?
If anything, I think they're thriving right now. We're an international sport, and just watching the news this morning with cases all around Europe, we need to find an avenue whereby we can play locally, but players still have the opportunity to be graded on an international scale, and that has been really the path we've trodden over a number of years, where the only way to really get players to understand their relative standard internationally is to get on a plane and fly overseas. It feels to me like that is a while away. So what we have to do is find a solution where players can play within Australia for a majority of the time, and yet have a really clear indication of what their international standing is. And it's not going to be perfect with the restrictions in travel, because you obviously have to have those results reflect people playing each other from different countries. But the alternatives of the ITF and the ATP and the WTA and so forth, it's going to be really difficult, I would say, for the next 12 or 18 months for players to have a really clear understanding of their relative standard on an international scale. But the UTR is a vehicle which, based on the algorithm and the way it's derived, gives us a pretty good sense for where players are at. And so, I think, quite the opposite. You've seen the emergence of, UTR events all around the country. The rating system itself has remained live and active. And there, particularly when we look at international travel, it is very difficult to see, a flurry of ITF type events happening, next year, given the border restrictions and so forth. So there'll be a place for it. I think they've really thrived in this environment. They're a dynamic and agile company. Once the world returns to normal, I think that's when their reality as a company might become more complicated. But certainly over the short term, I think there's a significant amount of space for them to operate.
All right. From Ollie, so this is probably got to listen closely to this one, Callum. So if you played a player with a higher UTR than yourself and you do really well, and another player who's got a higher UTR than you as well plays the same player and doesn't do that well, would your UTR go up more since you did better than someone with a better UTR than you?
Yeah. Yes. So on the and some of these questions might be best answered by there's an FAQ document on the UTR website, but certainly if you are what the algorithm would predict, this is a poor example, but if Sandon is a UTR of 12 and I'm a UTR of 11, the UTR would suspect Sandon would have to win that match 6-3, 6-3. Now, if Sandon were to win that match 7-6, 7-6, my rating would be positively affected, not because I won, but because I was more competitive based on what the algorithm put forward. What it then, the consequence, and maybe it relates to the second scenario, is what Sandon's playing pattern is following that. So how does Sandon go against other opponents will also influence my rating, because my rating is in part based on that result I had against Sandon. And it suggested that, I was more competitive than what the rating had anticipated. It benefits me. If Sandon then goes and beats, or performs well against players even higher rated than what he is, my rating will continue to improve off the back of Sandon's performances. So it is in part impacted by, the result I have against Sandon, but it is also in part impacted by Sandon's playing patterns beyond that particular match. And I hope that answers it, Sandon. But I think the point to really recognise there is you beating me is one thing, but the competitiveness is factored into the rating. So the more likely you are to win, if I can keep that result really tight to a 7-6, 7-6, my rating will really positively benefit as a consequence.
And kids and parents as well, I think, from all of this as well, is that, and you've heard Callum talk about it a couple of times, is competing. Is this, we're looking for opportunities, and it's been a very tough year to do that, to have competition and for you guys to go out and compete. And we've all been working really hard over the last 12 months and working on things, but it's going out and competing and trying your best and seeing where you stand with some of your peer groups and someone that might be a little bit better than you and someone that's not. But you got to go out. It's exactly what Millman said yesterday to all of you. Just go out and try your best and compete. And as he said, he had a chip on his shoulder that, all these other kids that were in front of him were doing all these great things. When he had the opportunity to go out and play them, every point, he didn't want to give away any points, no free points. And that's the competition side of it. So whether it's UTR or Australian ranking points or Premier League or whatever you guys are playing, the same message from all of us coaches is competing. You've got to have a competitive nature, and you want to go out and try your best and do what you can in those matches. Just from Billy, what ranking system are we going to go off? Well, right now we know, and Cal can answer that, but I can as well, that there is component of UTR rating, which and I'm going to show you a slide here soon from the NTA, which is the National Tennis Academy, which is what we've moved. The NDS has moved. You do some squads NDS. You don't have to do the NDS squads to be selected into the National Tennis Academy, which is up in Brisbane. But the first group of athletes was selected only from last week, really. And part of that selection process was, yes, okay, they had ITF experience as well, but they looked at their UTR rating, and that rating, I guess they took it from an international standard. So they've taken it from a birth year. So you might be in your 13th birth year, 14th birth year, 15th birth year, go all the way up to 23, because what the NTA is up there is they're selecting athletes starting in their 14th birth year and 15th birth year all the way up to 23. So there's a group of 18 to 23-year-olds, which is post-junior, that'll be training up there. And then there's the junior component, which is 14th birth year all the way up to 18th birth year. And part of that component, and that, if you want to call it criteria, will be UTR. And some of that will be ITF rankings. Some of that will be results. But if you're getting results in AR, whether it's in AMTs and those are tournament plays, well, they will get counted towards your UTR. So hopefully that answers your question. And I'm going to bring that slide up shortly, but just answer a couple more. Will UTR official ranking system even after coronavirus? Well, we've answered that one, Ashley, that it's going to be around for a while. And then Billy, again, how does your ranking move up even when you're not playing? So I think Callum sort of answered that a little bit, where maybe you had a win over someone, and they've gone off and continue to play, and they've had some more credible wins. So that value of what that win has that you've had over that person increases. So your rating goes up a little bit because it is a competitive match. It can, I think it, correct me if I'm wrong there, Callum, though, it can go the other way, whereas that person maybe goes out and starts losing to a lot of people lesser, and then that value win that you had over them, maybe they were higher at you at that time, it becomes less of a factor to your rating.
Yeah, so I guess that's partly mitigated on the fact that the 30 most recent matches are taken into consideration. So if I were to beat someone, convincingly, and then they subsequently lose to a number of people they shouldn't, it won't have a drastic impact on my rating because I have 29 other performances that are going to be counted towards my UTR. But that's one consideration. But what I would say to some of this, and there's it's an interesting place for our sport because one of the challenges which I suspect many players and parents on this call may be familiar with is this notion of chasing ranking points, and players flying all around the country to play some weaker tournaments and to amass some ranking points that we would term as Tennis Australia quite inflated. The rating, you do not necessarily need to do that to improve your rating. You can find opportunities locally. But the trade-off is, or the decision that's being considered is, you've got players who were once chasing a ranking that are now trying to protect a rating, and they think that to protect a rating you shouldn't play, but your rating will always be influenced by some of the activity happening around. And I don't want to speak for yourself, Sandon, but speaking with some of the players and parents who are of that mindset that I've got my rating to a place I really want, I'm now not going to play. That it's a great talent identifier, or potentially the opposite in many respects. The moment a player or someone shies away from the opportunity to compete and test themselves, it's a really important insight to what we would use as Tennis Australia as a talent indicator. And I can only assume John Millman was that, regardless of the ranking system, regardless of the rating system, just the thirst for competition is what drove the behaviour. And the best players love to compete, and they'll wear the risk of losing to someone they shouldn't for the opportunity to test their skills, to learn, develop, it is an interesting one when we see some of the behaviour that happens around the country, again, of this protecting a rating. Is really difficult to protect a rating given the activity that happens around it. And, as talent identifiers, if you like, the question fundamentally is, who is thirsty for the competition? So you would really look at, well, has this player played a bunch of matches, over the recent weeks because they're prepared to test themselves? They're prepared to put themselves in a situation where, the UTR says they should win 6-2, 6-2. Their rating can be improved by winning 6-1, 6-1, but it also could be negatively affected if they win 6-3, 6-3. So there's a few things at play here, but it's an easier conversation on the performance side, and particularly where players and parents, I suspect, on this call are, as at least for my opinion, was who are the players just thirsty to compete, regardless of the implication on a ranking or rating. They want it and they'll seek it out and they'll put it on the line. And so if we start to hear or see of this notion of protecting a rating, it is really difficult to protect it, as I said, because of the activity that goes on around the player. But secondly, what we do know of the great competitors, they just want to compete regardless of a rating or ranking system or what's at stake, whether it's a national title or a can of Coke. That is a tried and true understanding of the discipline of talent identification. Is just the appetite to compete at any opportunity.
Yeah, well said. I guess just one more from Minduk. I just wanted to know, how is your UTR affected when you're up in a match, but then you have to retire?
Yeah, so there's subject to the stage of the match. They're updating that policy, I believe, on the UTR website. So what I might do, I'll send through the link as to the FAQ document to Sandon, but there's an FAQ question that says, the match, a player would either potentially withdraw before a match start and that match would not count, or a player, the match has not reached a threshold of 4 games. So if they would, pull out of the match, a set down and 3-love down, that at this point would still count. So there's a game threshold of which, if there is a withdrawal prior to that, it wouldn't count. But if you're substantially progressed in the match, it would still count to your UTR.
Right. Mate, what I might do is I might just share this screen. Hopefully you guys can maybe see this. And I just want to talk through this quickly. So this is what I spoke about with the guidelines for the NTA. And you can see on performance, values, and potential. So if you look at the birth year there, let me just take that off. If you look at the birth year, not 14th birth year, 15th birth year, 16th birth year. So in your 15th birth year is a bit of a guide for the NTA. They look at, you should have around a 13.24 UTR rating, or be top 20 in your UTR birth year internationally. So I can tell you the 2 athletes from South Australia that have been selected, and it's not whether they want to take it up or not, is Charlotte Kempen's Potts, who's in the 16th birth year, and Edward Winter. So they are in the top 20 in their birth year UTR, and that's internationally. So that's a selection guideline, and the NTA moving forward wants to be known as, it's the new AIS. It's where the best players, everyone's going to train there. Is that the only pathway for us? No. It doesn't mean that if you're not around that mark at the moment in your 15th birthday, 16th birthday, as you heard again from Millman, he never really was around those marks internationally. But when he had the opportunity to compete against some of them when they would come home, he tested himself against where those opponents were in some of those players. Then you look at so that's just on UTR, the values, and there's the same values that we hold with the NDS. The player displays and adheres to the set values and behaviors of competitive, coachable, and committed. And then 3, the potential. The player is deemed to have strong top 100 potential based on assessment of the qualification panel. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, because some of the questions around that with UTR, how are we using it? It's a bit of a benchmark, whether it's an international benchmark, a benchmark for us within each state. But we want to drive home the message that it's a measure of, I guess, in your birth year, where you sit in your birth year, and having that competitive nature, and the events that we've been running for you guys on, whether it was Friday Night Lights, NDS this term, which is on Thursdays. Yes, they're events under the UTR, and they're all recorded. And from what I've seen this term, there's been some really, really good competitive matches and close matches, which is really good. And all of you that have turned up on those Thursdays, and even when some of the NIS kids that we've got on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I know we've been running some match play recently. We just want you to come in and compete. It's an opportunity to do that. You have your private lessons with your coaches. You have opportunities on the weekend and junior pennant on Fridays to compete, but this is an extra chance to just come out and test yourselves against your peer group, and enjoy that competitive stage of coming out and doing that. So if there's no more questions there, look, if anyone and their parents can think of anything else that they've got questions in regards to the UTR one, please either email me and I'll pass them forward to Callum or someone at UTR. But as Callum said, on the UTR website, there's an FAQ that hopefully can answer those questions, but you can also come in and probably email them yourself with a question, and they should get back to you as well. So I want to thank Callum for his time this morning, and thank you guys again for joining us on these chats. I just want to mention that, I have set up for the next few days a few more chats. Tomorrow, a little bit of a history lesson on tennis. Monday, you guys probably, sounds like you're going to be back at school, some of you. So you may miss the call, but all of these are going to get recorded. I'm going to continue them anyhow. And if you can't get there on one of the sessions, they will be recorded, and I'll send the link out, and you can go back and watch them. I think the really good one too is on Tuesday, which that won't change, but it's on the racket technology and strings. Some of you that don't have a lot of knowledge on that, or your parents, we've got the tech from Melbourne called the Racket Lab. He's going to come on and present, and might be something really worth everyone having a look at that on Tuesdays. I can't tell you can miss school for that. You've got to go to school, but we will record that, and I'll send it over to you guys to watch it another time. But yes, Thanks, Callum. Thanks, guys, for joining us again this morning. And you know, hopefully we get some good news overnight where we can get back on the tennis court next week and hit a few more balls again. But stay safe. Enjoy your rest of your Saturday and Sunday, and we'll hopefully see some of you guys on the call again tomorrow. And thanks, Callum.
Thanks all. Best of luck.
Thank you.